My name is Dan Kerr, and I wear many hats here at All Souls. And it's my privilege, including the hat I wear as the outreach chairman, which means I focus on building relationships with the community that we serve. And it's always great in that role to see a church full of people. So on behalf of our congregation, I welcome you here this evening. When you came into the church, you may have noticed a sign on the right-hand side which had our mission statement. If you missed it there, you'll see it on the back of the little bulletin on the concert for tonight. If you go to our website, you'll see our mission statement. So clearly we must take our mission statement very seriously. And those of you familiar with mission statements, that is why you exist. What role do you perform for society? And I'm not going to quote our whole mission statement. I'm going to quote one sentence from it. It says, "We strive to be mutually supportive of the personal spiritual journey, respecting the individuality of all and accepting the value of meeting people wherever they are on that journey." So we happen to be an Episcopal church, but we recognize that Christianity has many branches. And Episcopal Christianity is just one branch of that tree, so we recognize that. We also recognize that Christianity is not the only tree in the spiritual forest. So we recognize there are people of other faiths other than Christian out there. We also recognize that some people are proud atheists or naturalists. Or when I went to Roman Catholic school in Northport, I learned from the nuns of St. Joseph. But now when you look at demographic aspects, when you look at the census, the religious group that has the most growing in popularity, you want to know what it is? It's called the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, which is people without any faith whatsoever. So regardless of where you might be in terms of your spiritual journey, we meet people. Folks, there's plenty of room up in the first row. We meet people wherever they are on that journey, and we do that in a variety of ways. One of the ways we meet people, once they have a seat, we meet people. We meet people, the fact that this church is open every day. So I know that to be true because I'm the guy who opens the doors. And it's not unusual when I open those doors that there's someone waiting to come in. So we're open to the public every day, which I understand is rare amongst churches these days. We also meet people through, if you look on the inside of your concert bulletin here, you'll see other ways that we meet people. So one of the ways we meet people is we do an interfaith morning prayer service here every Tuesday morning. I do that with Deacon Tom Brownsworth from Messiah Lutheran Church. And if you drew a 10-mile radius around this church, and you identified every church, every mosque, every temple, you would probably find that the person who either the priest, the rabbi, the monk, whoever, who leads that congregation has probably spoken here through our interfaith morning prayer service. So we meet people through the morning prayer service every Tuesday. My wife Susan, wave Susan. Susan is also our bartender tonight. She leads an interdenominational rosary. I'm sure the good sisters who train her in Brooklyn are probably prouder of the fact that she does a rosary than she's a bartender. But anyway, Susan leads an interfaith rosary here every Wednesday. This concert, I know a number of you are here probably for the first time to see this wonderful group that we have tonight, the Whitman Trio. But we do concerts every month, either the first or second Saturday, and never fails, someone calls me up and says, "What time is the Saturdays at 6 concert?" And I always say, every time they call, it's at 6 o'clock. So it's always at 6 o'clock. You'll always see a playbill outside the church announcing it a couple of weeks in advance. You'll always see it in the Village Times Herald. Village Times Herald. Because we're very good about, they're very good supporters of our outreach, so you'll always see it there. And if you're on our mailing list, you'll always get a personal invitation that I will send you to come as well. This is the baseball season. Big game tonight with the Yankees and the Red Sox. Hopefully by the time we get home, the Yankees will be ahead. But we had a doubleheader today. What did I say we had a doubleheader? Because we had the concert in the evening. We also do a poetry series. And the poetry series is in the morning at 11 o'clock. We do it virtually. It's called Second Saturday's Poetry. And we always have a well-known published poet. And then anyone else who joins us has an opportunity to read their poetry. So we do that every month. And we also do Native American drumming every month as well. Native American drumming comes out of the Native American experience. It's a spiritual healing experience which is thousands of years old. If you're interested in learning more about those programs, any of those programs, just see me on the break. Also, if you'd like to be on the Friends of the Church list, one of the roles that I have here is I am the membership chairman. So people always ask me, how many people do you have? Well, it depends how you count. So if you count recently baptized babies and people living in nursing homes. Our congregation is about 100. But if you define our congregation as the people in the community that have a relationship with, it's about 1,100. And how do we go from 100 to 1,100? Because we do concerts, we have a guest book that people sign, we do poetry, and we do Native American drumming. And if you'd like to be on the Friend of the Church list, and I promise not to ask you for money, I promise, but what I will do, if you give me your name and you write your email legibly, I will send you invitations to our future concerts, future poetry, and also future Native American drumming. So again, welcome on behalf of our congregation. For this evening, for our concert, I'll leave this little sign-up sheet here, so you can put your name here and your email and intermission if you want to be a Friend of the Church list. This concert tonight will have 2 sets of music. So we will have 2 sets. We will take a break in between. We'll take a 15-minute intermission. So you want to hold up that thank you chart? So you'll see me counting it. That's because I'm a CPA, I have to count things. Anything you put in there goes directly to the musicians as the thank you for performing this evening for us. And we will conclude the program before 8 o'clock. So is it with great gratitude, fanfare, I'd like to present the Whitman String Trio. Go, folks, you want to come out? Whitman String Trio. This was a group that was founded at Stony Brook University in 2015, and they've been performing, well, they're coming out. They've been performing throughout Long Island ever since. And tonight they'll perform works by Beethoven, and I should have practiced this, Dohanyani, I hope I'm close, Dohanyani. So the trio consists of Joanne Dumastro on violin. Want to wave? I think you can recognize Joanne. She's performed at, All Souls is not her only performance venue. She's also performed at some equally impressive places like Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, Conner Hall. Her recording career ranges from contemporary music to film and TV soundtracks. She's a music coach. She trains young artists in the highly acclaimed Joyous Ensemble in New York City. And we're fortunate with the Stony Brook University right nearby. She has a Doctor of Musical Arts from Stony Brook. So let's welcome Joanne. So we also have Stephen Bourgon. Stephen, you want to wave? Stephen will be on the viola this evening. He's a professional violinist, violist, piano accompanist. He's a music teacher, and I'll have to learn about this on the break. Fenwell Class practitioner based on Long Island. He holds a Doctor of Musical Arts, also from Stony Brook, and a master's and bachelor degrees from Ithaca College. In addition to maintaining a full private teaching studio, he is an adjunct associate professor at Hofstra University and a founding member of the Whitman String Quartet and performs as a violinist and violist with numerous other ensembles throughout Long Island. Welcome, Stephen. And we also have Craig Mailer, who plays the violoncello. He's a versatile cellist and teacher living in Suffolk County, New York. He can be seen across Long Island. He performs at many weddings over weekends. He frequently performs with Joshua Epstein, playing many styles and music, including pop, classical, jazz, and even video game music. We haven't had video game music. Maybe we'll bring that in the future. He's also currently the orchestra director at Paul J. Jelinas Junior High School here in the Three Village. So let's welcome Craig. And it's a great pleasure that I present the Whitman String Trio. This group in various incarnations. I think this is the 4th time you guys have performed here. 3rd or 4th time, I lose track.
Yeah,
quite a few times, at least. So let's welcome again the Whitman String Trio.
Thank you, Dan, for the wonderful introduction. So as you mentioned, all of us studied at the State University of New York. We actually met while being part of the Emerson String Quartet's program, and that's actually when we formed the Whitman Quartet. And unfortunately, our other violinists couldn't be here today, so we'll be presenting the trio program.
So a little bit about our first piece, Trio in C minor by Beethoven. You may know Beethoven as this big giant who is just wrote all of these amazing symphonies, and everybody is compared to Beethoven. But I want to take you back to an earlier time, where Beethoven was 28 years old, And he still hadn't wrote a single string quartet yet. Why? Because he would have to get compared to Haydn and to Mozart. When he wrote this piece, he said at the time, when he was 28, this is among the best of my works. And so he decided from this point onward, he was ready to write string quartets after this. This is the last composition he ever wrote for string trio. Hope you
Now, Harrison graduated from West Point in 1917, a class that included several famous American generals. But Billy Harrison, he was known as Billy, is credited with having originated the plan that redesigned the American military high command following the disaster of December 7th. He also, we had D-Day was celebrated recently, and I'm sure you saw on TV, The Longest Day and other movies about D-Day. And you notice when they landed on Normandy, they were stuck. So it was General Harrison who devised the plan to be unstuck, open up the Normandy Peninsula, and give the Allies a quarter to free Western Europe and ultimately arrive in Berlin. After the Japanese surrender, Harrison was assigned to the staff of General Douglas MacArthur as chief of reparations. But Harrison was not a proponent of get-even type of settlement. Instead, he persuaded MacArthur to adopt the program of compassion and invite Christian missionaries to evangelize the Japanese people. Harrison promoted the distribution of Bibles and welcomed returning prisoners of war. You may recognize this name, Louis Zamperini. If you recognize that name, it's because he was the featured character in the very famous movie Unbroken, directed by Angela Jolie. But he invited these people to come and speak about their belief in Jesus. And she left out of the movie that Zamperini was one of the people who came and tried to spread Christianity in Japan. And one of his converts was Mushida, the guy who gave the commands, Torah, Torah, Torah. He also became an evangelist, preaching the good news in his homeland and other nations. Now, during the Korean armistice talks in Parmesan, those that know your history, that war lingered on for many years, and there was the armistice talks in Parmesan. Harrison became quite controversial because of his visible Christian faith, and it became an issue. For instance, the New York Times called Harrison the Bible-quoting general, and they didn't really mean that as a compliment. The men under his command knew him as a brave soldier who led them into battle, often riding in the lead vehicle. Now, why do I mention him? Well, he's got a special connection with this church. General Harrison also knew All Souls well. He sent his youngest son to the Stony Brook School, became a member of the board, and when the son returned to teach at the school, Harrison attended graduation exercises of several of his grandchildren. And like many folks in the village, when he visited Stony Brook, he always stopped into All Souls to pray. So we have a special connection with General Harrison. That's a true story. Okay, now getting on to intermission. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. So you want to hold up the contribution chart. So again, if you'd like to leave a thank you for the musicians, please leave the thank you there. I'll count it, but it all goes to them. If you want to be on the invitation list, the Friends of All Souls, put your name here. As far as intermission, I'll start my watch. We'll take a 15-minute break. We're serving in honor of not Joanne, who's has Romanian roots, but Stefan has Hungarian roots. So we're serving Hungarian Sauvignon Blanc, it's a nice white wine, and we're serving an Australian Shiraz as well. Unless you think all we do here at All Souls is drink alcohol, we also going to serve water. We don't have any clergy here to convert the water to wine. If you're wondering what to do with your empties, there's a trash bin here, and there's a trash bin there. And we do not have a pretentious person with a triangle and a tuxedo letting you know when the break is over. We'll ring the bell and dim the lights. Okay, so enjoy the break. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining for the second half. So our second half will be a serenade by Erno Whitman, who's also Hungarian, like the one. He was born 1877 and lived to 1960, so had a very busy life through both world wars. He lived most of his life at the beginning in Hungary. He taught there. He was very inspired by Liszt with his piano playing, by Brahms with his composition, so you hear a lot of very romantic sounds, just like Brahms and this serenade. He also was very closely associated with Kodály and Bartók, other Hungarian composers. And World War II, he wound up leaving, and after having some difficulty, he was actually fired from a position or wound up resigning because they wanted him to get rid of some Jewish colleagues at the time. So he wound up eventually emigrating to the United States. Lived in Florida for a long time, was buried there, and wound up actually passing away in New York, right here. So the serenade is 5 movements, very different from the usual 4-movement format. And he actually based this off of a Beethoven serenade that was 5 movements. We didn't play that for you today, but similar structure. So hopefully you enjoy. It's very dramatic, very lyrical, some folk tune sounds. Enjoy.
Okay, so before we break up, I thank you for all coming. I want to announce the next 3 concerts that we have. So on July 12th, we do this once a month at 6, Saturdays at 6. We've got a group of students, again from Stony Brook, the Voyager Reed Quintet will be here on July 12th. And August 2nd, we have a bluegrass band, a bit different, called Eastbound Freight. We performed here last year. Very well, the house will be filled with bluegrass music. And then September 6th, we do something very special. You know, I mentioned that we do monthly concerts, we do monthly poetry, and we do monthly Native American drumming. Once a year, we combine all 3. So what happens is there's a poet in the area, Carolyn Emerson, and she selects spiritual poems from various traditions. And then each poem, which is read by a local poet, is followed by a musical interlude, either by Dan, that's not Dan Kinney, that's Susan, but our Dan Kinney, our organist, will perform on the tracker organ. That organ goes back to before the Civil War. He'll do a musical accompaniment on the organ. We also have 2 students from the University, Ford, who's right on Ford Forkland, and he brings a different partner each year. So he does musical interludes. And then also we have our Native American drummer performs as well. So that is on September 6th, Conversations on the Sacred. So we hope to see you either, hopefully in July 12th, Voyager Street Quartet, the August 2nd, Eastbound Freight, and September 6th, Conversations of the Sacred. If you, again, on the way out, if you'd like to leave a thank you for the musicians, there's still a jar there. And if you'd like to add your name to the Friends of the Church list to get invitations to future concerts, please leave it here. Okay? Thank you for coming.